elderly millionaire was kicked out of an aircraft dealership because of his clothes. Hours later, everyone was shocked by what he did. It was a serene morning, the kind where the sun gently illuminates the streets, and movement seemed to slow down, as if the city was also enjoying the calm of the new day. On the porch of a simple, cozy house, John Perry was sitting in his rocking chair, watching the leaves on the trees move with the wind. For him, every detail of those quiet moments was a treasure. At the age of 70, what he lacked in youth he made up for in serenity and, above all, gratitude for life. John had always lived modestly, even with the comfort that his financial situation could provide. He was a man of means, but no one around him suspected it. In the eyes of his neighbors, John was just another old man with simple tastes. The fact is that for him, what really mattered was not material possessions, but the memories he carried and, above all, the people he loved. And among these people, one occupied a special place: his grandson, Charlie. Charlie meant everything to John. Since the boy's birth, John has felt his life change profoundly. And now, at the age of 7, the boy had become his greatest pride and joy, filling John's days with a vitality he had long thought lost. Charlie was a boy with an easy smile, the kind that captivated whoever was around him. With curious eyes and a seemingly endless imagination, he always found ways to turn the simplest things into grand adventures. That morning, as John watched the street, the sound of rapid footsteps in the hallway caught his attention. It wasn't long before Charlie appeared, running up to his grandfather with his face alight with excitement. "Grandpa, did you know that from up there in the sky, everything looks so tiny, as if the world were a toy?" exclaimed the boy, his eyes shining with excitement. John smiled, wondering where his grandson had got the idea. "Oh, really? And where did you hear that, my boy?" he asked, leaning forward, curious. "I saw it in a book Mom gave me. There was a picture of a helicopter up there, and you could see everything tiny like a map." Charlie replied, gesturing with his hands, trying to bring the image he had seen to life. John watched his grandson with tenderness. Charlie's innocence and enthusiasm were contagious, and he knew that every moment with him was a gift. Behind that smile, however, John had a worry that he didn't want to show. Charlie wasn't like other children. He was carrying a battle that many adults could never imagine. A few months earlier, the doctors had broken the sad news. Charlie had a rare form of cancer, and the prognosis was not encouraging. John and his family found themselves thrown into a whirlwind of appointments, treatments, and attempts to keep their spirits up, despite the bleak outlook. But as much as fear and sadness were always lurking, John refused to let Charlie see any sign of despair. For the boy, life was still one big amusement park, and John wanted it to be that way until the very last moment. "Would you like to see the world like this, up close, from above?" asked John, trying to sound casual, but attentive to his grandson's answer. Charlie nodded enthusiastically, his eyes once again full of hope. "Of course, Grandpa. It must be incredible, as if we were floating in the air." He made a wide gesture, as if he were flying. John smiled, but his heart squeezed. He knew that if it were up to him, he would do anything to see his grandson fulfill that wish. Charlie deserved a chance to experience something magical, to experience the freedom of the skies, even if it was just once. And that's what John intended to do. "So that's it, Charlie. We'll find a way to get you up there." John winked at his grandson, determined. The boy laughed, clearly excited, and ran to hug his grandfather. John held him tightly, feeling the little body in his arms, and let himself stay there for a few seconds. Inside, he silently repeated, "I'm going to give you this dream, my boy, no matter what I have to do." That promise became the engine that drove John. Deep down, he knew that Charlie's illness was relentless, but he also knew that the love he felt for his grandson was unshakable. He had already faced many difficulties in his life, but nothing compared to this feeling of powerlessness that was eating away at him. However, John never let adversity get to him, and this wouldn't be the first time. When Charlie finally went back into the house, John stood there alone, thinking about the possibilities. The desire to fulfill his grandson's dream had become a mission. He knew he couldn't waste any time. Time was, in fact, the most precious resource he and Charlie now had. Over the next few days, while accompanying his grandson to appointments and treatments, John began to discreetly plan how to make that flight possible. He didn't know much about helicopters or scenic flights, But he knew that, with the right amount of money, he could achieve anything. The only detail was that John didn't want to turn his grandson's dream into a cold, commercial experience. He wanted Charlie to feel special, as if the sky had been made just for him. One evening, while sitting with his grandson in front of the fireplace, John brought up the subject again, just as naturally as before. "You know, Charlie, I've been thinking, what if we could find a way to get you on that helicopter out?" he said, with a hopeful smile. Charlie looked at his grandfather with a mixture of surprise and joy. "Really, Grandpa? Do you really think we can?" He seemed almost unable to believe that something so magical could really happen. John nodded, holding his grandson's hand. "We're going to make it happen, no matter what I have to do, my boy." And there was a sincerity in his voice that made Charlie believe that this dream, somehow, really could come true. In the days that followed, John's promise to Charlie became the driving force behind his every decision. He started looking for information about scenic flight companies, visited some dealerships, talked to people, and prepared himself to face any challenge, all with a single goal: to make Charlie experience the freedom of the sky. For Charlie, those days were filled with new expectations. He now told everyone about his dream of flying, and his energy seemed renewed. When he talked about the helicopter, his face lit up and John saw, with a mixture of sadness and happiness, the sparkle in his grandson's eyes. Charlie was everything to John, and John was willing to go to any lengths to see him happy. Behind the facade of a simple man hid a determined grandfather, whose greatest treasure was not the money he had accumulated over the course of his life, but the smile and joy of a boy who, despite everything, still believed that life could be magical. The days went by and, between one appointment and the next, Charlie and John remained steadfast, nurturing their dream of flying. For John, however, the reality was harsh. Every visit to the hospital was a reminder that time was running out. The cancer was relentless, and even though Charlie tried to be brave, his body was beginning to show signs of fatigue. One afternoon, while they were waiting for their appointment, Charlie, sitting next to John, held his grandfather's hand and asked with a curious but vulnerable look, "Grandpa, do you think I'll be able to fly before I get too tired?" The question took John by surprise. He didn't want his grandson to realize the seriousness of the situation, but he knew that Charlie was too smart not to notice the changes in his body. John took a deep breath and squeezed the boy's hand affectionately. "Of course you will, my boy. We're almost there. I promised. And you know I always keep my promises, don't you?" said John, with a reassuring smile. Charlie nodded, still holding his grandfather's hand. Even with John's soft voice trying to ease his anxiety, the boy knew it wasn't going to be easy. He watched the other children running around the park while he needed frequent rest and began to understand that what he was facing was not temporary. "I just wanted to do this with you, Grandpa," murmured Charlie, almost as a secret. John closed his eyes for a moment, holding back the tears. He couldn't show weakness now. All Charlie needed was confidence and serenity. Taking a deep breath, he pulled himself together and, with a smile, proposed, "How about we make a deal? You save your energy for the day of the flight, and I'll take care of the rest. Deal?" Charlie smiled and gave John's hand a firm squeeze. Deal. Despite the deal, John knew that time was a cruel adversary, and every second that passed made that dream more urgent. At night, he would catch himself in thought, going over every step, trying to calculate every detail to make sure nothing went wrong. The idea that this flight could be his grandson's last great adventure drove him, but it also terrified him. He had to make everything work. A few days later, on a morning when the air felt particularly heavy, John sat down with Charlie's mother, his daughter, to discuss the next steps. They both knew that, although hope was a powerful fuel, it wasn't enough to beat cancer. "Dad, do you really think you can make this happen?" she asked, looking at him with a mixture of hope and fear. She knew her father and knew that he was a determined man, but Charlie's situation was so delicate that she feared creating false expectations. John looked at her with a firm gaze, although his voice showed a slight vulnerability. "I have to try, darling. Charlie needs something to cheer him up, something to make him feel that he's worth fighting for. I can't take that away from him." He paused, staring at the window, his gaze lost. "If I could swap places with him, I'd do it without thinking twice. But since I can't, I'll do my best to give him at least that experience." She nodded, touching her father's hand, feeling the weight of that promise. She knew that John was willing to do anything to fulfill his commitment, but she also feared the consequences if something went wrong. That same afternoon, when they were at home, Charlie called John into his room, where he had sorted out some of his favorite toys and photos of adventures they had been on together, such as trips to parks and fishing days. "Grandpa, these are my treasures," said Charlie, showing John a small box full of photos and toys. "I'd like to take everything upstairs, but I know it's too much." He laughed, looking at the toys. John laughed along, touched by his grandson's simplicity and innocence. He crouched down at Charlie's height and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You know, Charlie, when we're up there, you won't need these treasures. The view will be so beautiful that it will seem like the whole world is yours." John stared at him, trying to convey the same excitement he felt. Charlie gave a short laugh and replied, "All right then, I'll just take you. You're my greatest treasure. You know that, Grandpa." John couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He held his grandson in a tight hug, without words, just leaving that moment engraved in his heart. He knew that that simple, innocent statement had a deep meaning. John found himself determined to make that dream a reality, with even more commitment. After that conversation, Charlie's health fluctuated. He seemed more tired and slept more than usual, but he never stopped mentioning his desire to fly. John stayed by his side all the time, trying to cheer him up with stories about how beautiful the sky would be and how they would see the horizon like two free birds. One such night, while watching Charlie sleep, John had a revealing thought. He realized that the dream of flying wasn't just a boy's wish. It was a way of keeping Charlie's spirit alive, even in the face of the harsh reality that surrounded them. John knew that, by making this dream come true, he would be offering his grandson not just an experience, but a memory capable of eternalizing the love they shared. The days went by, and finally John decided he wouldn't wait any longer. Every minute was valuable, and he needed to act quickly if Charlie's health was to allow him to realize his dream. John called several aircraft dealerships, looking for information and prices, until he found one that sounded promising. He arranged a visit and felt he was on the right track. When he left the house that day, he stopped next to his grandson, who was resting on the sofa, and promised again, "By the time I get back, Charlie, I'll have an answer about her flight. So, my boy, are you ready for a great adventure?" Charlie gave a weak but happy smile. He nodded and replied in a soft voice, "Ready, Grandpa. I'll be very ready." With that answer, John set off. The day dawned with a special glow, a sense of urgency and purpose taking hold of John as he prepared to go to the aircraft dealership. He had carefully chosen the location after days of research and phone calls. Skyline Aviation was one of the most renowned dealerships in the city, known for its quality service and modern fleet of helicopters. John believed that if Charlie's dream flight was to happen, it would be there. Before leaving, he took one last look at Charlie, who was sleeping peacefully on the sofa, a serene expression on his face. With a fond smile, he whispered, "Don't delay, my boy. Soon you'll be flying like you've always dreamed." On arriving at Skyline Aviation, John was faced with an imposing building, with glass windows that let you see into the luxurious and sophisticated interior of the store. Helicopters lined up glistened in the sun, and the sound of engines being tested filled the air, giving the place an aura of excitement and movement. John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the commitment he had made to himself and his grandson. As he entered, he was immediately approached by a middle-aged, elegant man with a confident posture, who looked at him with an appraising eye. His name was Mike, the dealership manager, and he didn't hesitate to make a quick assessment of John, from his simple clothes to the tired expression on his face. John noticed the critical eye, but didn't flinch. His purpose was clear, and nothing was going to stop him. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" said Mike in a formal tone, but without much interest. John, always kind, greeted him with a slight nod and got straight to the point. "Yes, I'd like to know about the panoramic flights. My grandson, well, he has a great dream of flying, and I want to make it happen. I'm willing to pay what it takes to make it an unforgettable experience." Mike raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. To him, that modest-looking gentleman didn't look like someone who could afford a helicopter ride, especially an unforgettable one. "I see," said Mike, pausing with a sigh disguised as indifference. "You know, sir, John, right? This kind of experience isn't exactly cheap. We can offer panoramic tours, but they come at a high cost." Mike made a point of emphasizing the word high. as if he were trying to discourage John. John, however, remained calm, even though he could sense the disdain in the manager's words. He knew the value of that moment, and nothing would make him give up. "I understand, Mike, and I'm willing to pay whatever it takes." John kept his tone firm, determined not to let that disrespectful attitude shake him. Before Mike could reply, a young woman approached. It was David, a salesman from the dealership, who had been listening to the conversation from afar and had taken pity on John's story. He saw something in the man's eyes that seemed much more than just a customer. David greeted John with a sincere and friendly smile. "Hello, Mr. John. I am David. I hear you want to make your grandson's dream come true?" David looked at him with genuine interest. John, relieved by the more welcoming reception, smiled back. "Yes, David. My grandson, Charlie, is ill and he has always dreamed of flying. I want him to have that experience, something that makes him feel special." David nodded, touched by the story. He knew how meaningful dreams could be, especially in difficult times. "I understand perfectly, Mr. John. We have several options for sightseeing tours, and I would be happy to help you find the one that best fits to make this moment special for your grandson." David looked at Mike, who was watching the scene with disdain, and felt a pang of disapproval at the manager's attitude. John, surprised and grateful for David's empathy, replied, "Thank you very much, David. It means a lot to know that someone really understands what this means." Just then, a third person entered the conversation. Rebecca, the owner of Skyline Aviation, had noticed the movement and, curious, approached. With a warm smile, she introduced herself. "I'm Rebecca, the owner. From what I hear, you want to make a very special dream come true for your grandson. Could you tell me a bit more about it?" John took a deep breath, feeling that at last someone was genuinely interested. He told Charlie's story, how the boy had discovered cancer and how the dream of flying was one of the few things that still made him smile. Rebecca listened carefully, and her eyes filled with compassion. She understood John's urgency and desire to make that moment unforgettable for his grandson. "Mr. John, I am touched by your story and the love you show for your grandson. I would like to give you this flight as a gift. It would be an honor to be part of this special moment," Rebecca said, sincerely touched by the story. John, however, shook his head. He knew that every penny he spent would be proof for the effort and love he put into Charlie. He wanted to cherish that moment, to show Charlie that his dream was worth every sacrifice. "I really appreciate your generosity, Rebecca, but I insist on paying. This is important to me and to Charlie. I want him to know that it was worth every effort." John looked at Rebecca with a determined glint in his eyes. Rebecca, amazed at his attitude, nodded, respecting his decision. "If that's the case, let's do our best to make it a wonderful experience for him, Mr. John. I'll make sure he has the most beautiful ride we've ever offered here at Skyline Aviation. And if you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask." She smiled, genuinely committed to making Charlie's dream come true. David, seeing the outcome, approached John and held out his hand. "So, Mr. John, do we have a deal?" he asked, sealing the deal with a warm handshake. John shook David's hand and then Rebecca's, feeling relieved and grateful. Even with Mike's indifference, he had found people who really understood what this moment meant. As he left the dealership, John felt a wave of relief and happiness. Finally, he was one step closer to making Charlie's dream come true. Walking through the streets, he couldn't help but smile. He knew there were still details to sort out, but he felt strengthened by the kindness and understanding he had found in Rebecca and David. That day, John returned home with a light heart, eager to tell Charlie that his dream was closer than ever. And as he watched his grandson sleeping on the sofa, the soft sound of his breathing, John whispered to himself, "It's all right, my boy. You're going to fly." That night, while the house remained silent, John sat in his armchair in the living room, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. The warmth was comforting, but his mind was far away, traveling back in time. Charlie's face, his joyful laughter, and his grandson's innocent dreams brought him a mixture of happiness and nostalgia. Deep down, John knew that this journey to fulfill Charlie's wish wasn't just about a simple helicopter flight. It was a way of honoring something much bigger. As he reflected, John remembered his own childhood. He had come from a humble family and knew very well what it was like to live on little. He had grown up in a small country town and from an early age had learned the value of simple things: a sunset, an afternoon playing with friends, the warmth of a good family conversation. The moments of happiness he had didn't come from material goods, but from small gestures and the people around him. He remembered his own grandfather, a strong and loving man who always said, "John, never stop valuing what really matters. The most precious things in life are priceless." That phrase had stayed with John all his life, and now he saw the same teaching reflected in his desire to give Charlie something that no amount of money could buy: memories and love. "Grandpa," Charlie's soft voice snapped him out of his thoughts. The boy had woken up and, with his hair mussed and his eyes still half closed, was looking at him curiously. John smiled and motioned for his grandson to come closer. "Come here, my boy. Couldn't sleep?" John asked, pulling the blanket aside so that Charlie could sit next to him. Charlie snuggled up to his grandfather and sighed, watching the fire with him. "I was dreaming about the flight. I know it hasn't happened yet, but it's like I can already feel the wind on my face, you know?" Charlie commented, with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. John smiled, his heart warmed by his grandson's words. "I know exactly what you mean, Charlie. When I was a kid, we didn't have much. But my grandfather, your great-grandfather, taught me that some things are more valuable than any wealth. He always said that the most important things in life can't be bought." "Like what?" Charlie asked, curious. John thought for a moment before answering. "Like a moment like this, next to someone you love. Or a dream that makes you want to fight, no matter what. And right now, you're the most valuable thing to me, Charlie. That's why I'm going to do everything I can to see you flying and smiling, the way you've always dreamed of." Charlie looked at his grandfather with admiration. For him, John wasn't just a grandfather. He was his hero. He knew that John was by his side, always willing to give him everything he could, even if it meant sacrificing his own comfort. The boy then slid his small hand over John's and, with a serious expression, said, "Grandpa, I want you to know that I love you very much. More than any flight, you are my greatest treasure." His grandson's words touched John deeply, bringing a wave of emotion that he tried to contain. He hugged Charlie tightly, feeling the lightness and fragility of that little body against his, and promised himself that every effort would be worth it. He would do anything to make Charlie's dream come true. The evening progressed, and the two of them remained side by side, in silence, watching the fire, enjoying every second of that moment together. Deep down, John knew that Charlie understood more about life than many children his age, and that made him sad and proud at the same time. Over the next few days, John decided to share a little more of his story with Charlie. He wanted his grandson to know that the struggles we face make us stronger, and that, even in the face of difficulties, there is always something worth fighting for. One afternoon, while they were walking together in the yard, John began to tell the story. "Charlie, when I was young, I wanted to be a businessman, but I didn't know anything about wealth or how to get there. I just knew how to work hard and appreciate every little achievement." John said, as they walked side by side, "And you did it, didn't you, Grandpa? You're a businessman?" Charlie replied with a proud smile. John laughed, putting his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Yes, I did it. But do you know what I've learned over time? I've learned that real wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you share. And what I want to share with you now, Charlie, is that dream. I want you to understand that every effort, every step, is worth it when you have someone you love by your side." Charlie nodded, seeming to absorb every word. He was realizing that the helicopter flight wasn't just a ride. It was a way for both of them to build a memory that would last forever. For him, the waiting and anticipation only added to the thrill of realizing that dream alongside his grandfather. In the days leading up to the flight, John dedicated himself to preparing every detail. He knew that the experience had to be special, unique. He talked to David and Rebecca to make sure everything was in order, and even made sure Charlie had a special outfit for the day. Every little choice was a symbol of affection, a way of showing her grandson that he deserved the world. The night before the flight, while preparing his luggage for the next day, John felt a mixture of anxiety and joy. He knew it would be a special day, a day to remember. The image of Charlie's face, lit up with enthusiasm and the realization of his dream, gave him strength. Sitting next to the luggage, John felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. Charlie was standing there with a shy smile. "Grandpa, do you think I'll be scared up there?" he asked, looking curious and a little worried. John smiled, running his hand over his grandson's head. You might feel a little cold in the belly, Charlie, but I'll be there with you. And the fear goes away when you feel like you're making a dream come true. I promise it will be incredible." Charlie nodded, feeling comforted. He snuggled into his grandfather's arms, closing his eyes and letting himself be lulled by the promise that everything would be all right. At that moment, John realized that, more than the flight itself, what Charlie really wanted was the certainty that he wouldn't be alone, and that he could guarantee with all the love he carried in his heart. The two of them spent that night talking about what the big day would be like, about the landscapes they would see and the memories they would make. For Charlie, the anticipation was already part of the dream. For John, it was the reaffirmation that love and courage go hand in hand. The next morning, the day had finally arrived. The sun was rising timidly over the horizon, covering the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. John and Charlie were ready, both filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. For Charlie, this was the moment when a dream would come true. For John, it was the opportunity to do something that would remain etched in their memories forever. As soon as they arrived at Skyline Aviation, they were greeted by David, who smiled and greeted John with a warm handshake. "Good morning, Mr. John, and you must be the famous Charlie," said David, bending down to the boy with a genuine smile. Charlie smiled back, shaking David's hand firmly, as if he were meeting a hero. For him, every detail of that moment was magical. "I'm Charlie, yes, and I'm flying in a helicopter today," he replied with a joy that lit up the room, his eyes shining with anticipation. John, watching his grandson's enthusiasm, felt his heart warm. Charlie's every smile was a victory, a reminder that, despite the difficulties, they could still have happy times together. He turned to David, grateful for all the support. "Thank you, David. You've done something incredible for us, and I'll never forget it." John spoke in a sincere tone, trying to contain the emotion that was beginning to take hold of him. David nodded, touched by John's words. He knew that this flight wasn't just a trip. It was the realization of a dream for a brave boy and a farewell to a devoted grandfather. "We're honored to be a part of it, Mr. John, and I promise we'll make this the most beautiful flight Charlie could ever imagine," David assured us with a firm and determined look. They were led to a reserved area where Rebecca was already waiting for them. Next to the helicopter, Charlie marveled at the size of the aircraft and the way the sun reflected in its windows. He could hardly contain his excitement. "Wow, Grandpa, it's even bigger than I thought," he exclaimed, running up to the helicopter, his eyes wide. John approached, smiling tenderly as he saw his grandson's genuine joy. "That's right, my boy. And from up there, the world will seem very small." He put his hand on Charlie's shoulder, conveying reassurance and support. Rebecca approached, smiling at them both. She held 2 helmets in her hands, ready for use on the flight. She handed one to Charlie and one to John, while explaining the procedure in a soft, welcoming tone. "Ready for this adventure? Let's make sure everything is safe and that you enjoy every second up there," she said, carefully adjusting Charlie's helmet. Charlie nodded, almost speechless, just smiling as he tried to contain his anxiety. The excitement in the air was palpable. John watched everything, absorbing every detail. That image of Charlie, smiling and looking forward to the flight, was something he wanted to keep forever. Once they were ready, David helped them into the helicopter. Charlie settled down next to John, holding his hand tightly while the final preparations were made. As the helicopter began to rumble and the propellers turned, the boy let out an excited laugh. "Look, Grandpa, we're flying," he shouted, his eyes fixed on the window as the aircraft lifted off the ground. John smiled, squeezing his grandson's hand affectionately. He watched Charlie's face, attentive to every expression of surprise and joy. When they were at a considerable height, David, who was in charge of the flight, turned to them with an encouraging smile. "Are you enjoying the view?" he asked, trying to catch the boy's attention. Charlie nodded quickly, pointing to the mountains in the distance and the small houses that now looked like toys. "It's just like in my dream, David. I've always wanted to see the world like this." "As if it were a lie," he exclaimed, delighted, his eyes fixed on the landscape unfolding before him. As they flew over the city, John couldn't take his eyes off Charlie. For him, every second there was like a gift. He knew that this moment represented more than just a walk. It was a way of showing his grandson that dreams can come true, even in the face of the most difficult circumstances. Suddenly, Charlie turned to John, his eyes shining with a smile that exuded pure happiness. "Grandpa, I've never felt so free. It's like nothing can stop me up here." He squeezed John's hand tighter, as if he wanted to share that feeling of freedom with him. John returned the squeeze, thrilled. He felt a deep peace, as if, for a moment, they had left behind all the difficulties and limitations imposed by the disease. Up there, only love and the desire to live that moment were real. After a while, David began to maneuver the helicopter to return to the dealership. But before he did, he took one last panoramic turn so that Charlie could see the horizon once more. The boy leaned forward, admiring the immensity of the sky and the colors that the late morning sun was spreading. When they finally landed, Charlie was still beaming, and the smile on his face was the greatest gift John could imagine. He held his grandson down, feeling grateful for every detail of the experience. Rebecca and David approached, eager to hear how the flight had gone. "So, Charlie, did you enjoy your first flight?" Rebecca asked, with a warm smile. Charlie nodded vigorously, looking at everyone with an expression that mixed gratitude and enthusiasm. "It was the best day of my life. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, David," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Rebecca bent down to the boy's height and ran her hand through his hair. "I'm so glad you liked it, Charlie. This flight was special for us too." She looked at John, sharing a moment of silent understanding. John, his heart light and full of gratitude, shook David's hand and then Rebecca's. "You've done something wonderful for us. I'll never forget it," he said, his eyes shining with emotion. Rebecca nodded and David smiled, clearly touched. When they said goodbye and left the dealership, John and Charlie walked side by side in silence, enjoying the echo of the fresh memories of that flight. For Charlie, it was as if he was carrying a piece of heaven with him, a living memory that he would keep forever. "So, Grandpa, can we fly again someday?" asked Charlie, hopeful, with a look that showed his desire to repeat the experience. John smiled, his heart filled with renewed hope. "Yes, we can, my boy. That sky is all yours now." After the flight, Charlie's life seemed to have taken on a new shine. He talked about the experience with an excitement that lit up the room and inspired everyone around him. Every time he described the view from above, his eyes were filled with life and hope, as if, somehow, that flight had awakened something he had been keeping dormant. The sky, which had once been just a dream, was now a precious memory, and Charlie took every moment to remember it as a way of reliving that moment of freedom and happiness. The news of Charlie's flight soon spread around the city. Rebecca and David, touched by the story, didn't hesitate to share it with the other employees and customers of the car dealership. Each person who heard about the little warrior facing a difficult battle was moved. Little by little, Charlie's name became known, and his moving story inspired those who listened. It wasn't long before Rebecca and David made a decision that would change the very history of Skyline Aviation. One afternoon, when John visited the dealership to thank them once again for what they had done for his grandson, Rebecca called him in for a private chat. With a warm smile, she led him into a room where David was already waiting for them. "John, I wanted to share something with you," Rebecca began, with a special twinkle in her eye. John, a little surprised, watched the two of them waiting. He sensed that something significant was about to happen, but he couldn't imagine what it might be. "Well, we were all deeply touched by Charlie's story. Seeing how emotional he got during the flight showed us the true value of what we do here. So, after talking to David, we decided to pay tribute to his grandson. We want to name the helicopter he flew in Charlie's dream," said Rebecca, staring at John, waiting for his reaction. John was silent for a moment, absorbing what he had just heard. Charlie's dream. Those words moved him deeply. He felt the weight of the tribute, the love and respect that both Rebecca and David had for their grandson. With his eyes watering, he replied quietly, I don't even know what to say. This is very special. Charlie will be very happy to know that his dream will live on in this way." David nodded, also touched, and put his hand on John's shoulder. "We want this helicopter to be a symbol of hope, to remind everyone that dreams must be lived, no matter what the circumstances. Every child who comes here and hears Charlie's story will know that the impossible can come true." John looked at them both, feeling deeply grateful. He knew that Charlie would be delighted with this tribute. Now his dream wasn't just a memory, but something that would continue to inspire others. John's heart was filled with a mixture of pride and gratitude. You are incredible people. This is one of the greatest honors we could receive. I know Charlie will be thrilled, John said, trying to contain the emotion in his voice. Rebecca then added, "And one more thing, John. We want this helicopter to be available to you at all times. Whenever you want to fly, you won't have to book it or worry about anything. Charlie's dream will be here, waiting for you." John nodded, absorbing every word. Not only had they honored his grandson, but they had also opened the door for him and Charlie to experience more unforgettable moments. For John, this gesture was like a gift from the universe, an opportunity to prolong the joy and hope in Charlie's life. That same evening, when they returned home, John sat down with Charlie and told him about the tribute. The boy's eyes widened when he heard the name Charlie's Dream and understood that the helicopter he had flown and would now bear his name. "You're kidding, Grandpa," exclaimed Charlie, incredulous, but at the same time overflowing with happiness. John laughed, shaking his head. "I'm not kidding, my boy. This helicopter is now a tribute to your dream. And not only that, whenever you want to fly, it will be waiting for you." Charlie was silent for a moment, absorbing the grandeur of this gesture. He knew it wasn't something ordinary. He felt special, valued, and above all loved. With his eyes watering, he looked at his grandfather and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa. This is the best present of all. Now I know that even when I can't fly anymore, my dream will still be up there." "Right," John nodded with emotion, pulling his grandson into a tight hug. "Right, my boy, your dream will always be up there, and every time it flies, it'll be like you're flying too." Charlie smiled and closed his eyes, allowing himself to absorb that moment of deep connection with his grandfather. He felt lighter, as if the weight of his illness and the limitations it brought were momentarily lifted. Knowing that her dream now had a name and a story gave her the strength to face the difficult days. Over the next few days, the story of Charlie's dream began to attract attention. Rebecca and David shared the news with more people, and soon the community knew about the helicopter and the meaning it carried. The town's children, curious and delighted, began to visit Skyline Aviation to see the helicopter up close and hear Charlie's story. Each one of them, upon hearing about the boy who had realized his dream of flying, left with a new vision of hope and inspiration. Charlie had unwittingly become a kind of local hero, and for John, seeing his grandson admired and respected by so many people was an indescribable joy. He knew that even though Charlie's time was growing short, his grandson's legacy would live on forever, spreading love and inspiration. From time to time, John and Charlie returned to the dealership for another flight. With each takeoff, Charlie felt as if it was the first time, renewing his joy and allowing himself to dream once again. And every time the helicopter landed, he would look up at the sky and mutter to himself, "Thank you for letting me fly again." For John, each of these flights was more than a memory. It was the continuation of a dream. As time went by, John realized that the realization of Charlie's dream had brought renewed strength to the boy. Even though the disease remained relentless, Charlie seemed determined to make the most of every second, as if he wanted to turn every moment into something memorable. However, John knew that cancer was an unfair fight, and although his grandson kept the sparkle in his eye, the days began to get harder. One quiet afternoon, while John and Charlie were resting in the backyard, the boy looked at his grandfather with an expression of seriousness that he rarely showed. "Grandpa, do you think I'll be able to fly many more times?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. John felt a squeeze in his heart. He knew that Charlie was a clever boy and that he somehow understood the gravity of the situation. Taking a deep breath, he tried to respond calmly, placing a loving hand on his grandson's shoulder. "My boy, as long as you have the strength, we'll fly as many times as you want. Charlie's dream is always waiting for us, and every time you feel ready, we'll be there," replied John, trying to keep his tone light. Charlie smiled, a small, shy but sincere smile. He leaned on his grandfather's shoulder and murmured, "I like knowing that my dream is still there. Even when I'm tired, it's as if it's still alive, and so am I." John looked at him, his eyes watering, feeling the depth of what his grandson had said. In that simple sentence, Charlie had expressed something that went far beyond his childhood understanding. For him, the helicopter wasn't just a vehicle. It was an extension of his own life and the happy moments he had shared with his grandfather. A few days later, when Charlie woke up with a little more energy, John surprised him. "How about a visit to Charlie's dream today? Maybe we could take a ride in the sky. Just you and me," he said, with an animated smile, trying to infect the boy. Charlie nodded enthusiastically, although there was a hint of tiredness in his eyes. Even on days when his body didn't cooperate, Charlie's heart always seemed to say yes to the idea of flying. When they arrived at the dealership, Rebecca and David welcomed them with a special warmth. They knew how much each flight meant to Charlie and always made a point of preparing everything with care. David, as usual, adjusted the boy's helmet and said, "Ready for another adventure, my friend?" Charlie smiled, his eyes shining, and replied, "Always, David. It's like every time is the first time." Rebecca came over and crouched down next to him, putting a hand on Charlie's shoulder. "You know, Charlie, every flight we take with you is special for us too. You remind us that dreaming is one of the most beautiful things in life." Charlie nodded, taking her words to heart. For him, that was more than a sentence. It was a confirmation that his dream had value, that his desire to fly was something important not only to him, but to everyone around him. As the helicopter took off, Charlie and John stood in silence, watching the landscape rapidly recede and the world seemed tiny below. The buildings, the trees, the cars, everything took on a new perspective as they ascended, and Charlie snuggled up next to his grandfather, a soft smile on his face. "You know, Grandpa, from up there, everything seems peaceful. It's as if there are no problems, just heaven and us," he said, his voice calm. John nodded, squeezing his grandson's hand. "It's true, my boy. Up there, everything seems to be in the right place. There are no worries. It's like heaven is embracing us, isn't it?" Charlie agreed, and the two of them continued in silence, just watching the horizon. Time seemed to hang in the air, and, for a few minutes, the worries and the weight of the illness seemed to disappear, leaving only the tranquility of that moment. When they returned to the ground, Charlie was visibly tired, but happy. The flight had invigorated him in a special way, as if every second in the air had given him the strength to face the challenges ahead. John watched him with affection, aware that these moments in the sky were not only the fulfillment of a dream, but also a source of strength for his grandson. When they had said goodbye to Rebecca and David, John turned to Charlie and asked, "So, my little aviator, ready for more flying?" Charlie laughed, holding his grandfather's hand. "Always, Grandpa. I'll keep every flight here in my heart." John smiled, touched. He knew that, although the days were getting harder, the memory of those flights would be a treasure that he and Charlie would share forever. And for him, every time they were up there, floating among the clouds, it would be like eternalizing the love and happiness they shared. In the days that followed, Charlie and John made fewer flights, but every time they went up, it seemed that the sky opened up especially for them. And every time Charlie looked at the horizon, he felt that his dream was alive, vibrating in the air around him. A few weeks later, on a clear, sunny morning, John decided it was the perfect day for another adventure in the skies. He watched Charlie sleeping peacefully and, with a smile, decided that this experience needed to be special, something unique. His grandson had been facing difficult days, the treatments were more intense, and tiredness seemed to accompany him all the time. But John believed that the power of that flight could renew Charlie's strength, if only for a few hours. When Charlie woke up, John greeted him with a surprise. "Good morning, my little pilot. How about another ride on Charlie's dream today?" he said, smiling. Charlie blinked, still sleepy, but soon a glow of excitement lit up his face. "Really, Grandpa? Are we going to fly again?" he asked, trying to get out of bed with a little more pep than in the previous days. John nodded, helping his grandson get ready. "That's right, Charlie. And today is a beautiful day. We're going to see the mountains, the river, and maybe even some clouds up close." Charlie smiled excitedly, and as he got ready, John noticed the sparkle in his grandson's eye. It was as if the mere thought of flying again gave him his energy back. John knew that those moments in the sky had immeasurable value for Charlie, something that went beyond fun. They were moments when he felt free, light, without the worries that illness brought. When they arrived at Skyline Aviation, they were greeted once again by Rebecca and David, who soon realized John's determination to make that flight a unique moment. David approached Charlie and, with a smile, said, "Today I prepared a special flight for you, Charlie. We're going to see some landscapes that you may not have seen before." Charlie looked at his grandfather, surprised and delighted. "This is going to be amazing, Grandpa. I can't believe we're going to see new places." John smiled and put his hand on his grandson's shoulder, feeling grateful for being able to give him another special moment. As they prepared for the flight, Rebecca approached and handed Charlie a small gift, a pair of aviator glasses with the name Charlie discreetly engraved on the side. It was a simple gesture, but it thrilled the little boy. He put the glasses on and looked at his grandfather with pride. "Look, now I'm a real pilot," he exclaimed, straightening his glasses. John laughed, his heart warmed at seeing his grandson so happy. He felt that every detail of that day was helping to create a memory that Charlie would carry with him forever. "Yes, now you're more prepared than ever," replied John, patting Charlie on the shoulder, who smiled broadly. As the helicopter took off, Charlie and John watched the city get smaller and smaller as the blue sky opened up in front of them. With each ascent, the boy watched the landscapes with fascination. The fields, the hills, and the river sparkling in the sunlight looked like living paintings. And from up there, everything took on a different perspective, as if the world were a magical place. During the flight, Charlie looked at his grandfather and said, with a tone of gratitude, "Thank you, Grandpa. These moments are the best of my life. When I'm up here, everything seems to get easier." John held Charlie's hand, feeling the sincerity in his grandson's voice. He knew that these moments were more than just a walk. They were a form of liberation, a way of allowing Charlie to experience life to the full, even in the midst of the limitations imposed by his illness. "And they're the best of my life too, my boy. Every second here with you is a gift," replied John, his voice breaking, trying to contain his emotion. David, who was piloting the helicopter, decided to make one last surprise. He maneuvered the aircraft towards an area where some clouds were lower, creating a kind of white carpet in the sky. As they entered the clouds, Charlie let out a laugh of pure joy. "Look, Grandpa, it feels like we're inside absorbing cotton," he said, amazed, as he stretched out his hand, almost as if he wanted to touch the clouds. John laughed, delighted with his grandson's reaction. "That's right, Charlie. It's like we're in a magical world of our own." For a few minutes, they flew over that white expanse, and Charlie seemed to absorb every detail, as if he wanted to imprint that image in his mind forever. For him, this was more than a flight. It was a real adventure, something that transcended reality and transported him to a place where nothing else mattered. At the end of the flight, as the helicopter began to descend, Charlie still kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, enjoying every second of that moment. And as the helicopter landed gently, he let out a sigh, as if he was coming back from a dream. When they got off, Rebecca and David approached them to find out how the flight had gone. Charlie, still wearing his aviator glasses, looked at them with a smile that conveyed all the joy he had felt. "It was the best flight ever. I'll never forget what I saw today," he said, with a twinkle in his eye. Rebecca and David smiled, pleased to see that they had managed to provide something so special. For them, every flight with Charlie was a way of honoring his courage and his love of life. As they said goodbye, John looked at his grandson and said softly, "We'll treasure all this, Charlie. Every moment we spend here, because it's these moments that make us strong." Charlie nodded, holding his grandfather's hand tightly. "I know, Grandpa. I'll keep it all here, deep in my heart." They hugged, with the afternoon sun reflecting on them, creating an image of peace and love that would remain in their memories forever. As the days passed, Charlie's health began to decline more visibly. The energy he had previously shown seemed to be gradually replaced by constant tiredness, an exhaustion that even the dream of flying didn't seem to relieve completely. Even so, Charlie kept his spirits high and made a point of smiling at his grandfather, as if to spare John any pain. One particularly quiet morning, John found Charlie looking out of his bedroom window at the sky, his expression serene but thoughtful. He came over and sat down next to his grandson, putting his hand on his shoulder, a gesture that meant comfort and support for both of them. "What are you thinking, my boy?" John asked softly, trying to capture what was going on in the boy's mind. Charlie sighed, his eyes fixed on the clouds passing slowly across the sky. "I was thinking about how beautiful the sky is, Grandpa. From up there, you see everything so small, but at the same time, the world seems to get bigger." He paused, looking at John. "I wish every child could see what I saw. You know, Grandpa, I think it would make them dream too." John listened attentively, touched by Charlie's generosity. Even in the midst of his own struggle, the boy thought of others, wanting to share with them the beauty of the world seen from above. John leaned over and took Charlie's hand. "You have a huge heart, my boy, and know that your dream doesn't end here." Those children who come to see Charlie's dream at the dealership, they hear your story, and you inspire them to believe in things that seem impossible. Charlie nodded, smiling slightly. It seemed to comfort him, as if he knew that his dream would continue, even when he could no longer be there. He looked at his grandfather with a peaceful expression. "That makes me happy, Grandpa, to know that my dream could be the dream of other children too." John swallowed, moved by his grandson's maturity and kindness. He felt that Charlie, in his innocence and purity, had understood something profound about life, something that many took years to learn. The value of leaving something good for others, of turning a simple wish into hope for those who were yet to live. A few days later, John visited the dealership to thank Rebecca and David for everything they had done. During the conversation, he shared Charlie's wish that other children could have the chance to see the world from above, just as he had. The story deeply touched Rebecca, who spent a few seconds reflecting on it before replying. "John, I couldn't agree more with Charlie. He has a rare heart, and I think we have a responsibility to make his dream continue." Rebecca looked at David, and the two exchanged a determined glance. "We can create a scenic flight program for children in the community. And, of course, we'll call it Charlie's Dream Flights. It will be a way of keeping alive the inspiration he brought to us all." John was silent, surprised and moved. He hadn't expected them to turn Charlie's idea into something so real, so meaningful. He felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, and his eyes filled with tears. "I can't thank you enough. This is going to mean the world to him," John murmured, overcome with emotion. David put his hand on John's shoulder as a gesture of support and understanding. "It's the least we can do. Charlie has taught us a lot about the value of dreams and how a small action can transform someone's life. We want other children to experience the same joy." The next day, when John told Charlie the news, the little boy was overjoyed, his eyes shining with joy and pride. "Are they really going to do that?" he asked, his voice full of hope. John nodded, holding his grandson's hands tenderly. "Yes, my boy. Your dream will now be shared with many other children. Charlie's Dream Flights will take all those who dream big, just like you." Charlie smiled, a sincere and peaceful happiness lighting up his face. He cuddled up next to John and whispered, "It makes me feel like I'm flying again, Grandpa." For John, that answer was like a gift of consolation. He knew that Charlie was at peace with what life had in store for him, and that he had found deep meaning in his dream. In the days that followed, the first children began signing up for the scenic flights, and Charlie's story quickly spread throughout the community, inspiring other families to live with more love, hope, and gratitude. Every time the helicopter took off, John felt that a piece of Charlie was flying with it, as if his grandson's love and legacy were forever etched in the sky. As the weeks went by, the Charlie's Dream Flights project took shape and gained importance in the community. Children from different parts of the city began to sign up for the flights, eager to experience the magic of seeing the world from above, just as Charlie had done. Each of these children heard the story of the brave boy who, even in the face of adversity, managed to fulfill his greatest dream. It was impossible not to be moved by the legacy he had left behind. For Charlie, knowing that other children were living the same dream was an immense joy. Even on the days when he felt most tired, he smiled as he listened to the stories of the flights and the messages of affection that the children's parents sent to John, thanking him for this unique opportunity. Charlie had become a symbol of hope and inspiration, and the boy understood the depth of the impact his dream was having. One afternoon, while resting in his bed, Charlie called his grandfather to his side. John came over, sat on the edge of the bed, and held his grandson's hand. Charlie looked at him with a serene smile, but there was something different in his gaze, as if he wanted to share something special. "Grandpa, I've been thinking," began Charlie, his voice low but firm. "You know, sometimes when I'm dreaming, I feel like I'm flying again. It's like Charlie's dream is there, waiting for me. Only this time it's different. It feels like I'm going somewhere beautiful, where there's no pain." John felt a lump form in his throat. He knew that Charlie was smart and, even at his young age, seemed to understand that his struggle was coming to an end. But instead of sadness, there was a peace on the boy's face, an acceptance that touched John deeply. "My boy," began John, his voice breaking, "you're the bravest person I've ever met. And if you feel that this beautiful place exists, then I believe it's waiting for you." Charlie smiled, squeezing his grandfather's hand. "I think so, Grandpa. And when I'm there, I'll remember all the flights we took together. Every single one of them will be with me. And that makes me happy." John couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He knew that this was a special moment, a silent farewell between them. He hugged Charlie, holding him with all the love he felt, as if he wanted to eternalize that moment forever. "And me too, my boy. Every time I look up at the sky, I'll see you flying. You'll be there, in the clouds, free as you've always wanted to be," replied John, trying to convey the same peace he saw in his grandson's eyes. Over the next few days, the Charlie's Dream Flights project continued to grow. Rebecca and David made a point of keeping John informed about each child who took the flight, sending photos and touching accounts. Each of these flights was like a tribute to Charlie, a symbol of his adventurous spirit and his love of life. One morning, when John went to visit Charlie in his room, he found the boy with a faint smile, his eyes closed, as if he were dreaming. He came over, sat down next to his grandson, and took his hand. "Good morning, my pilot. How are you?" whispered John, trying not to interrupt the boy's moment of tranquility. Charlie opened his eyes slowly and looked at his grandfather with a peaceful smile. "I was dreaming again, Grandpa. This time, I was flying really high, much higher than last time, and I felt so light, like I was floating weightlessly." John nodded, feeling the weight of his grandson's words. He knew that Charlie's time was running out, but he felt grateful for every second that could still share. "You've always been a great driver, Charlie, and wherever you go, I know you'll be flying with the same courage and joy," John replied, stroking the boy's cheek. Charlie smiled, closing his eyes again, as if he wanted to hold that last memory with his grandfather close to his heart. For him, there was no sadness, just a sense of peace and fulfillment. He knew that, even if he was no longer there, his dream would live on in heaven and in the hearts of other children. That same night, Charlie left peacefully in his sleep. John, although devastated by the loss, felt an inexplicable calm when he saw his grandson resting, as if he had really found the beautiful place he had dreamed of. The news of Charlie's departure quickly spread through the community, and each person who heard the story felt the impact of his passing. Rebecca, David, and everyone at Skyline Aviation decided to keep Charlie's Dream Flights project alive so that Charlie's dream would continue to inspire and transform lives. For John, the loss of Charlie was a deep pain, but when he looked up at the sky, he always saw a vivid memory of his grandson. Every time the helicopter took off, he felt as if Charlie was up there, flying with the same joy and freedom he had always dreamed of. And so Charlie's legacy lived on, not just in the sky, but in the hearts of everyone who was lucky enough to hear his story. And for John, every child who climbed aboard Charlie's Dream was proof that love and hope really can transcend time and distance. The days following Charlie's departure were marked by a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude for John. In every corner of the house, he found little signs of his grandson: a forgotten toy in a corner of the living room, a crumpled drawing of a landscape they had imagined together during one of their flights, and the pair of aviator glasses Charlie loved to wear. Each object brought back vivid memories, and John felt the weight of absence, but also a deep peace for having done everything in his power to see his grandson happy. One morning, while walking to the Skyline Aviation dealership, John noticed how the Charlie's Dream Flights project was already part of the community's routine. On the way, he met families commenting on Charlie's helicopter, and the children greeted him enthusiastically, some calling him Charlie's grandfather, with curious looks full of admiration. Charlie's story had touched so many hearts that he was now seen as a local hero, and every flight was a silent tribute to his legacy. On arriving at the dealership, John was greeted with warm hugs from Rebecca and David. They knew his visit that day was special. He looked at the Charlie's Dream helicopter, now marked with a small gold emblem bearing his grandson's name, which shone in the sunlight. The sight brought a mixture of emotions, and John remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing the impact of everything that helicopter represented. "Good morning, John," greeted Rebecca with a gentle smile. "We have a surprise for you." John looked at her, curious, while David waved at him, beckoning him to follow. They led him to an area where several children were waiting anxiously. Some of them were holding drawings and small colorful cards with affectionate messages for Charlie and John. The children had gathered to pay tribute to the boy who had shown them the beauty of dreaming. "We wanted you to see how important Charlie was to each of these children," explained David, his eyes watering. Not only did he make his own dream come true, but he planted the desire to fly and to see the world with eyes full of hope in the hearts of each of these children. John smiled with emotion as the children approached him to hand over their drawings and cards. One of the boys, with curly hair and curious eyes, handed John a colorful drawing of a blue sky with a helicopter flying through the clouds, with the words, "Thanks, Charlie." The boy looked at John with a seriousness that was touching for someone so young. "Your grandson has done something very nice, Mr. John. I want to fly one day too, just like him," said the boy, holding John's hands. John bent down to the child's height and put his hands on his shoulders. "You will fly, young man. Never stop dreaming, just like Charlie." He believed that anything was possible. "And you can believe it too," replied John, with a warm smile. Rebecca and David watched the scene in silence, touched by the connection John had made with these children. For them, Charlie's dream flights had become more than just a project. It was a space where dreams came to life, a tribute to Charlie's courage and love. After interacting with the children, Rebecca called John to a more private corner. She held a small box in her hands, with a serene expression and a glint of pride in her eye. "John wanted to give you this. It's a symbol of the legacy that Charlie left us." Rebecca opened the box, revealing a miniature replica of Charlie's dream helicopter, with an inscription on the base, "Forever in the skies, forever in our hearts." John took the miniature with trembling hands, feeling the weight and importance of the gesture. The replica was a tribute to Charlie, a symbol that his spirit would live on, not just in flights, but in the hearts of every person he had inspired. With watery eyes, he looked at Rebecca and David. "I can't thank you enough. This is more than I could have imagined. You turned my grandson's dream into something eternal," said John, his voice tinged with emotion. David put his hand on John's shoulder. "Charlie's dream is an inspiration to us all. This helicopter represents hope and courage, and we want everyone who flies in it to remember that dreams never die." John nodded, his heart full of gratitude. He held the miniature carefully, promising himself that he would keep it as one of the greatest treasures he had ever received. He knew that wherever he was, Charlie would smile too, feeling the love and admiration that everyone there carried. As the sun began to set, John said goodbye to Rebecca, David, and the children, taking with him the miniature helicopter and the cards the children had made for Charlie. With every step back home, he felt the weight of his grandson's love and memory, knowing that although Charlie was no longer physically by his side, his presence was in every flight, every smile, and every dream he had inspired. That night, looking up at the starry sky, John held the miniature helicopter and whispered, "You did it, my boy. Your dream is more alive than ever." And there, under the blanket of stars, John felt Charlie's presence beside him, as if the boy were really there, flying freely among the stars, fulfilling his wish to fly high and spread hope wherever he went. A few weeks after the moving tribute at Skyline Aviation, John began to feel that he needed to do something more to keep Charlie's legacy alive. The miniature helicopter and the cards from the children were well kept at home, but he wanted to take his grandson's message to even more people, to spread Charlie's inspiring spirit everywhere he could reach. And it was with this in mind that John made a special decision to organize an annual event in Charlie's memory, bringing families and children together for a day of free flights and activities celebrating life and dreams. As he shared his idea with Rebecca and David, he saw the enthusiasm shining in their eyes. Both were deeply touched and, without hesitation, offered all the support needed to make the event a success. They wanted the day to be more than just a meeting. It would be a celebration of the hope and determination that Charlie represented. On the morning of the event, the sky was clear and the air fresh. Skyline Aviation was decorated with colorful balloons and banners that read, "Dream Big, Charlie's Legacy." Children and families began to arrive, some dressed in aviator goggles, others holding small toy airplanes, all eager to take part in what would become a tradition. John walked around the site, greeting each family with a smile and sharing Charlie's story. For him, each conversation was a way of keeping his grandson's spirit alive. One of the children, a little girl with braided hair and curious eyes, took John's hand and asked, "Do you think I could be like Charlie too, Mr. John? That I could fly really high?" John bent down to her height and smiled, his eyes shining. "Of course you can, my dear." Charlie believed that we all have wings to fly. It doesn't matter if it's in a helicopter or in the dreams you carry. You just have to believe with all your heart. The girl smiled and hugged John before running off to tell her parents what she had heard. For him, moments like that were precious, a confirmation that Charlie's legacy really did touch lives. When it came time for the flights, Rebecca and David led the children to Charlie's dream, the helicopter that now carried Charlie's story with each takeoff. Each child who climbed into the helicopter took with them a little piece of Charlie's dream, a renewed hope that, even in the face of difficulties, the human spirit can find joy and strength. When David took over the helicopter, he made a point of explaining to each group of children that they were flying in Charlie's dream, and tenderly told the story of the boy who dreamed of seeing the world from above. The children listened with attentive eyes, enchanted by the idea that this flight represented something greater, something that transcended the clouds themselves. After the flights, John joined the families in an open-air circle. He held the miniature helicopter and looked at each person around him, feeling the power of Charlie's presence. With a smile, he began to speak. "Today we are here to celebrate the life of my grandson, Charlie. He has taught us that dreaming is something powerful, something that gives us strength, even when things seem difficult. And he has shown us that by making our dreams come true, we can also help others to believe in theirs." He paused, looking at the emotional expressions of the parents and children. For him, that moment was the embodiment of everything Charlie had taught him, the value of a shared dream, of a hope that transcended time. Charlie's Dream Flights is not just about flying. It's about keeping the spirit of courage and love alive. Each and every one of you here is part of that dream. And I hope that when you look up at the sky, you'll remember that there's always a place where dreams can come true, John concluded, his voice breaking with emotion. Rebecca, who was standing next to him, put her hand on his shoulder and added, "Charlie showed us that the impossible can happen, that even the greatest limitations are no match for a heart full of hope. And that's why this event will be an annual milestone, so that we never forget the power of believing." At the end of the speech, the families applauded and some children ran to hug John, who felt his heart warmed by every gesture of affection. He knew that Charlie would be smiling at that moment, happy to know that his dream had touched so many lives and would continue to inspire others. As the sun began to set, the event ended with one last tribute to Charlie. Rebecca and David organized a special flight, where the Charlie's Dream helicopter would fly over the city, carrying a banner with the words, "Dream big, Charlie." John, accompanied by everyone present, watched the helicopter take to the skies, the sound of the propellers echoing like a reminder of everything Charlie had stood for. As the aircraft disappeared over the horizon, he closed his eyes, feeling a deep peace. In that instant, he knew that Charlie was up there, among the clouds, living forever in the heart of every child who dared to dream. The event would become a tradition, an annual celebration that would unite the community around Charlie's dream and all that he had left behind. For John, it was the best tribute he could offer his grandson, and he felt grateful for every single person who helped keep the flame of hope and courage that Charlie carried alive. And so, as the helicopter flew away, John murmured softly, looking up at the sky, "We've flown high, my boy, and we'll keep flying." After the event in Charlie's honor, John felt that something inside him had changed profoundly. The sadness he had felt at his grandson's departure was gradually transformed into a sense of peace and purpose. He realized that although Charlie was no longer physically by his side, the boy's spirit lived on in every smile, in every dream fulfilled, in every flight in the Charlie's Dream helicopter. Now his role was to ensure that this legacy continued, inspiring other lives. One sunny afternoon, John decided to pay a visit to the dealership. When he arrived, he found Rebecca and David organizing some paperwork and discussing new plans for the Charlie's Dream Flights project. They saw him enter and went to meet him, both with warm smiles. "John, we were just talking about you," said Rebecca, gesturing for him to come closer. John smiled, feeling the affection and respect he always found there. "I'll come to see how things are going, and I also thought I'd share some ideas I have for the project," he replied, already feeling part of the team. David exchanged an excited glance with Rebecca, and they both settled around a table, ready to listen to John's suggestions. He pulled a small notebook out of his pocket, where he had jotted down a few thoughts that had been running through his mind. "I was thinking that, as well as flights for the children, we could create a kind of journey, something that would help families understand the importance of dreaming, just as Charlie taught us all," John explained, leafing through his notes. "We could organize meetings where families share their own dreams and challenges. I think that would make the project even more special." Rebecca and David nodded, clearly delighted with the idea. Rebecca smiled and replied, "I think it's wonderful, John. Each family has its own stories, and sharing these stories can strengthen the community, as well as helping us to continue Charlie's legacy. He taught us that dreams are ageless and that we all, in a way, have wings." David added excitedly, "And to make these gatherings even more meaningful, we could organize small flights for families, so that they feel the thrill of seeing the world from above, as Charlie loves so much. Perhaps we could create symbolic flight packages, where they not only fly, but also reflect on what it means to dream and believe." John was touched to see their enthusiasm. He felt that he was not alone in his mission to carry Charlie's spirit forward. They had become a real team, united in a greater cause, the idea of helping other people understand the value of dreams, even in the most difficult situations, seemed to give new meaning to everything. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm sure Charlie would be proud of it. He was always so generous, always thinking of other children. And I know that, somehow, he wanted other people to find reasons to smile too," said John with a nostalgic smile. Rebecca touched John's shoulder, feeling the sincerity of his words. "And we're here to help make that a reality, John. We're going to make sure that Charlie's dream flights continues to grow and touch even more lives in the most beautiful way possible." The next few months were dedicated to implementing these new ideas. With the support of Rebecca, David, and the community, Charlie's Dream Flight started offering meetings where families could get together, share their stories, and find mutual support. At each meeting, John shared the lessons he had learned from Charlie, encouraging people to never give up on their dreams and to cherish the small moments. At one of these meetings, a mother approached John with tears in her eyes. She was holding the hand of her daughter, a little girl who was looking up at the helicopter with her eyes shining. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity, Mr. John. My daughter has always dreamed of flying, but I never imagined that it could actually happen. Charlie's story inspired us deeply. He was an extraordinary boy," said his mother, her voice breaking. John smiled with emotion and bent down to speak to the girl. "Are you ready to fly, little one?" he asked softly. The girl nodded, holding on tightly to her mother's hand. With John's support, she boarded the helicopter, and for a brief moment, he saw Charlie's reflection in her, that same sparkle in her eye, the same courage. John knew that with every child who flew, it was as if Charlie was flying too, spreading hope through the skies. At the end of the meeting, as the sun set, tinting the sky with golden and pink hues, John stood next to Rebecca and David, watching the helicopter land once again. He sighed, feeling a deep peace, and murmured, as if speaking directly to his grandson, "We're doing your bidding, my boy. Your dream keeps growing." Rebecca listened and put her hand on his shoulder with a fond smile. "Charlie's dream has become a legacy, and it lives on in every child who feels the same thrill of flying," she said tenderly. David added, looking up at the sky, "This is just the beginning, John. I believe that this project will touch many more lives. And as long as there are people who believe in the power of dreams, Charlie will be there, flying alongside each and every one of them." The gentle wind brought a feeling of comfort, as if it were an invisible hug, a reminder that Charlie's love really had transcended time. For John, it meant everything. He wasn't just carrying on his grandson's legacy, he was keeping alive the essence of what it meant to dream without limits. As the Charlie's Dream helicopter waited at rest for its next flight, John, Rebecca, and David stood there in silence, united by the memory of a boy who taught everyone the value of courage, love, and dreams that should never be abandoned. And that night, on his way home, John looked up at the stars, feeling that Charlie was there, in every bright spot in the sky, always present, always flying high. The first anniversary of Charlie's departure was approaching, and John felt his longing for his grandson growing every day. But in the midst of this longing, he also carried a sense of pride and gratitude. The Charlie's Dream Flights project had transformed the lives of so many children and families that for him, it was as if Charlie's spirit was present in every smile, in every dream realized. John knew that in order to honor Charlie's legacy even more, he needed to do something special that day. With this in mind, he got together with Rebecca and David to discuss a new idea. Sitting around a table at Skyline Aviation, John explained what he had in mind, his voice soft and full of determination. "I would like to carry out a special flight, something symbolic, to mark Charlie's first birthday in the skies. I thought of a tribute where each child who took part in the project could leave a message or a drawing for him, and then, during the flight, launch these messages into the sky. It would be as if each child was sending him a direct message," explained John as he watched Rebecca and David's reactions. Rebecca put her hand to her heart, clearly moved by the idea. David nodded, his eyes reflecting the same emotion. "It's a lovely idea, John. Charlie would certainly be very happy to see all these children sending him their words and feelings," said Rebecca with a sweet smile. David added, "And we can make sure that every child receives a memento of that day, as a symbol that dreams and memories are never lost. Let's make this an unforgettable day for everyone." With the help of Rebecca and David, John began to organize the event. Soon, word of the tribute spread throughout the community, and families began sending messages, drawings, and affectionate letters to Charlie. Each of these children seemed to want to repay the gift they had received by flying, and John was touched to see everyone's dedication and affection. On the morning of the event, the sky was clear and blue, perfect for the special flight. Children and families gathered at Skyline Aviation, carrying cards, balloons, and small gifts. Each one carried the love that had come through Charlie's legacy. John felt a mixture of sadness and joy at seeing so many people there, united by such a pure feeling. Before the flight, he asked to speak to the children and their families. With the miniature Charlie's Dream helicopter in his hands, he looked at everyone and began. "Today we are here to remember Charlie, my grandson, who, although he is gone, has left a mark that will never be erased. Each of you is part of that dream. And every time we fly, it's as if he's with us, up there smiling. Today, we're sending these messages to him as a gift from all of us." The children listened attentively, and some held their cards and drawings even tighter, as if to make sure that every word and every line was seen by Charlie. John continued, feeling strengthened by everyone's presence. "This flight is a reminder that dreams never end, that even when someone we love leaves, they live on in every smile and every heart they touch." After the speech, the children handed their messages to Rebecca, who carefully organized everything, placing each letter and drawing in a basket to be taken on the special flight. John approached a little girl holding a red balloon and a drawing of a sky full of stars. He bent down to speak to her. "Is this for Charlie?" he asked, pointing to the balloon and the drawing. The girl nodded with a shy smile. "Yes, I drew the sky for him, so he can see it from where he is now." John smiled, thrilled, and stroked the little girl's head. "I'm sure he'll love it. You've made a lovely present." When the helicopter was ready, John climbed aboard with a basket of messages, feeling the symbolic weight of each letter and drawing. David piloted, with Rebecca by his side, and the helicopter began to climb, cutting through the air smoothly. As they moved away from the ground, John looked down, seeing the children and families waving enthusiastically, some with tears in their eyes. When they reached the ideal height, John picked up the basket of messages and, with a careful gesture, began to throw each message into the wind. Each letter and drawing danced in the air before disappearing into the wind currents, as if they were fragments of dreams and hopes rising to meet the sky. "These are for you, Charlie. May they reach you wherever you are," murmured John, watching the messages spread across the sky. Rebecca and David also watched in silence, feeling the deep meaning of that gesture. For them, this flight wasn't just a tribute. It was a way of eternalizing the love and hope that Charlie had left for everyone. As they began to descend, John felt a deep peace, as if he had accomplished something very important, something that could not be put into words. When they landed, They were greeted by applause and emotional smiles from the children and their families. Some of the children ran up to John and hugged him, and he felt the warmth and sincerity of each hug, as if they were an extension of the love he felt for Charlie. One of the children, a bright-eyed boy, said, "Thank you, Mr. John. Charlie will see all the messages. I know that." John nodded with a serene smile. "Yes, he will. And he'll be very happy to know that you also believe in dreams." At the end of the day, as the sun began to set, everyone said goodbye, taking with them a special memory of that moment. John stood for a while watching the sky, now tinged with shades of orange and pink, and felt as if Charlie were there, somewhere among the clouds, lovingly guarding each message. For John, that day was confirmation that love never disappears, and that, even when someone is gone, their legacy lives on, spreading light and hope wherever they go. He knew that as long as there were dreams and people willing to make them come true, Charlie's spirit would continue to fly high forever. After the emotional tribute flight, John felt that the mission of keeping Charlie's legacy alive had reached a new level of significance. But even so, he knew that there was still more that could be done. An idea began to grow in his mind. He wanted every child who took part in the Charlie's Dream Flights project to have something to take away with them, something that could remind them of the importance of believing in their dreams, just as Charlie had done. So, one quiet afternoon, he decided to visit Rebecca and David at Skyline Aviation to share this new idea. When he arrived, he found them both working on organizing the next children's flying event. They greeted him with warm smiles, as always, and Rebecca soon noticed John's serious but excited expression. "John, you've got a new idea, haven't you?" she asked, always quick to notice the enthusiasm in his eyes. John smiled and nodded. "Yes, I was thinking, what if we gave each child a physical souvenir of the flight? Something they can carry with them, as a symbol that, no matter the difficulties, there is always the possibility of dreaming bigger." David frowned, pondering the idea, but a smile soon appeared on his face. "I like that, John, and I already have a few ideas. Maybe a small medal or a brooch with the Charlie's Dream symbol on it. Something simple, but meaningful." Rebecca nodded, visibly touched. "Or maybe a little dream notebook where they can write down their own wishes, just like Charlie once did. Something that encourages them to dream and, at the same time, is a reminder of what they've experienced here." John looked at them both with gratitude. He was touched to see how much Rebecca and David care about the project, as if Charlie's dream was part of theirs too. "I really like the idea of the notebook," said John, with a twinkle in his eye. "It could be simple, but with a message on the cover, something like 'Never stop dreaming.' That way, every child who flies with Charlie's Dream will be able to record their own dreams." The three of them agreed that this was an excellent way to keep Charlie's essence alive on every flight. In the days that followed, Rebecca made sure that the notebooks were lovingly crafted. On the cover, a starry sky and the words, "Never stop dreaming." Inside, a short message explaining Charlie's story and what the flight meant. When the first notebooks were ready, John was thrilled to hold one in his hands. He ran his hand over the cover, and for a moment, he could almost feel Charlie's presence beside him, as if his grandson were there, smiling at him and approving of the idea. The day of the next event arrived, and families started arriving early, bringing children eager for another adventure in the skies. When each child received their notebook after the flight, their eyes lit up, and many asked about Charlie and his story. For John, every question was an opportunity to tell them about his grandson, about how he believed in the power of dreams and the joy of living. One of the children, a little girl called Emily, looked at John with a delighted smile as she held up her notebook. "Mr. John, I'm going to write down my dreams here too. When I grow up, I want to fly very high, just like Charlie." John smiled, thrilled by the sparkle in Emily's eyes. "And you will succeed, Emily. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your dream is too big. Charlie always believed that the sky was the limit, and now you can believe that too." The girl nodded firmly, hugging the notebook as if it were a treasure. And John, seeing her enthusiasm, felt that Charlie's legacy was not only alive, but also spreading, touching every child with the same hope that his grandson carried. Throughout the day, the children flew around and then gathered with their notebooks, writing and drawing, while their parents watched with thrilled smiles. Many of them approached John to thank him for all his work. One mother, holding her daughter's notebook in her hands, said to him, John, this project, this dream of Charlie's, means a lot to each and every one of us. I see the sparkle in my daughter's eyes, and I feel that you are offering her an opportunity to believe in the impossible. That's a precious gift." John held his mother's hand, thanking her with a serene smile. "It's not just Charlie who has learned this lesson, but all of you, by believing in your own dreams. Every flight is a celebration of his courage, and that of every child who has ever dreamed of seeing the world from above." At the end of the day, when the last flight returned and the families began to say their goodbyes, John spent some time alone on the runway, looking up at the Charlie's Dream helicopter. He felt a peace he had never imagined he would experience after losing Charlie. It was as if his grandson's love and legacy were imprinted in every detail of that project, in every laugh, in every emotional look. Rebecca and David approached, and together, the three of them watched the sky, now tinged with the soft colors of sunset. John sighed, looking at his friends. "Today I felt that Charlie was closer than ever. Every time I see a child leave here with their heart full of dreams, I know he's with us," said John, his voice laced with emotion. Rebecca nodded, putting her hand on John's shoulder. "And he always will be, John, because as long as someone is willing to believe in their dream, Charlie's legacy will live on." David, with a smile on his face, added, "And we're going to keep doing that work, bringing Charlie's dream to more and more people. He started something big, and we're here to make sure it never ends." John smiled, feeling strengthened by the support of his friends. That night, on his way home, he put Charlie's Dream notebook next to the miniature helicopter, in the same place where he kept all his most precious memories. He knew that, even in Charlie's physical absence, his grandson was still alive, flying high in the hearts of every child and family who visited Skyline Aviation. And so, with the sky already covered in the first stars of the night, John murmured, looking at the horizon, "We flew together, Charlie, and we'll keep flying, always." Months after implementing the Dream booklet, John felt that the Charlie's Dream Flights project was growing stronger and stronger, with a profound impact on the lives of the children and their families. However, he still felt he could do something more, something that would continue the work he had been doing and reinforce the importance of persevering with dreams, even in the face of adversity. With this in mind, a new idea emerged: to create a special event to bring together all the families and children who had taken part in the flights throughout the year, so that they could share their dreams and the progress they had made in trying to achieve them. He called the idea Dream Night, and excitedly took the proposal to Rebecca and David, who, as always, welcomed the idea with enthusiasm. "John, that's a wonderful idea," said Rebecca, her eyes shining. "It would be incredible to see what these children wrote in their notebooks and how the flight inspired each one of them." David nodded, already imagining the logistics of the event. "And we could make it a tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of Charlie's Dream Flights, bring the families and children together to remember Charlie's legacy and celebrate every achievement. After all, his dream continues to grow through each of these children." Excited about the new project, they began planning the event with care and attention to every detail. They wanted it to be an unforgettable evening, where the children could share what they had written in their notebooks and talk about how flying in Charlie's Dream had impacted their lives. Skyline Aviation was decorated with soft lights and colorful flags, and around the main area, there was a large panel with the title Dream Big, where the children could stick photos, drawings, and messages about their dreams. On the evening of the event, John watched as families arrived, bringing the children who had flown in throughout the year. The joy in the atmosphere was contagious. The children proudly carried their notebooks, some even holding small projects and drawings that represented their dreams. John felt his heart warm as he saw the scale that Charlie's legacy had reached. It wasn't just a flight. It was a living inspiration, a hope that continued to multiply. When everyone had settled down, John took to the small makeshift stage and began to speak, his voice heavy with emotion. "Good evening, everyone. Today we are here to celebrate something very special. Each and every one of you is part of the dream of my grandson, Charlie. He believed that we all have wings, even if sometimes we can't see them. He taught us that, even in the midst of difficulties, we can dream and reach high places, as long as we never stop believing." The children listened to him attentively, some holding their hands tightly to their notebooks, while their parents watched with excited smiles. John continued, "Tonight, I want to hear the dreams of each and every one of you. I want to know what you wrote in your notebooks and how Charlie's dream inspired your lives." He paused, smiling. "Each dream shared here today is like a spark of hope, and together we're going to make the sky shine with these stars." One by one, the children were invited to come on stage and share their dreams. A little girl called Sophia, with big, bright eyes, was one of the first to speak. Holding her little notebook, she looked at the audience and began, "I wrote here that I want to be a doctor. I want to help children, like Charlie, who need a friend to look after them. When I flew in the helicopter, I felt that everything was possible, that my dream was there, waiting for me." Sophia's mother wiped away a tear as her daughter pasted a photo of herself in a doctor's outfit made out of paper onto the panel. The audience applauded, and John felt an indescribable emotion, seeing how the flight had planted a seed of hope in that little girl's life. Other children went up, each with a unique dream. Some wanted to be artists, others scientists, and some simply dreamed of traveling the world, of exploring and learning. Each story was like a piece of Charlie that lived on, that inspired and grew, a legacy that seemed to come alive with every word. When all the children had shared their dreams, Rebecca, her voice breaking, took the microphone and made one last invitation. "We now want each of you to write a message for Charlie, something he can take with him from heaven. Put your words on the board so that he knows how much his dream has changed our lives." The children approached the panel and began to write. Little notes like "Thank you, Charlie," and "I'm going to follow my dream for you" appeared, decorating the mural with a mixture of colors and feelings. It was as if, even when he was away, Charlie was there, listening to every word, smiling at every child he had inspired. When the panel was filled with messages, John stood and admired the collective work. For him, this was the greatest tribute he could imagine for his grandson. He turned to the children and said, moved, "Charlie is watching each and every one of you, and I know he's very proud. Keep dreaming big always. You are proof that dreams can change the world." The evening ended with a celebration, where families and children laughed, swapped stories, and took photos around the Charlie's Dream helicopter. For John, it wasn't just a party, but the realization of something much bigger. He knew that as long as there were children willing to believe and dream, Charlie's spirit would live on in each and every one of them. As the lights of Skyline Aviation went out and the last family said their goodbyes, John looked up at the starry sky, feeling a deep peace. He knew that Charlie was there, flying among the stars, guiding every child who believed in their dream. And as he walked home, with a light and grateful heart, John whispered to the sky, "We'll never stop dreaming, Charlie. And I know you'll be with us every step of the way, every flight, every dream." If you enjoyed this video, comment your age and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you'd like to see more content like this, we prepared the next video just for you. Click here to watch